They say you never forget the sound of death coming for something you love. It starts as a whisper in the grass, then builds to a terrible silence that makes your blood run cold. That's what Bill Henderson heard that Tuesday morning when his prize Brahman bull, Thunder, let out a bellow that could wake the dead. But what happened next in those cypress groves would challenge everything this old Vietnam vet thought he knew about courage, loyalty, and the kind of love that don't need words. Because when a 23-foot Burmese python wrapped itself around 2,000 pounds of pure muscle and heart, Thunder's reaction shocked every ranger, every scientist, and every soul who witnessed what some folks are calling the greatest act of forgiveness ever caught on camera. Sometimes the biggest heart beats in the biggest chest, and true love means protecting even those who once tried to harm you. 2 years had passed since that remarkable day when Thunder and Sierra changed everything anyone thought they knew about love, loyalty, and second chances. The old oak tree still stood sentinel over what was now officially known as the Cypress Creek Wildlife Sanctuary. Its bark scarred from that first desperate encounter, but its roots deeper than ever. Thunder, now 10 years old, moved with the measured dignity of an elder statesman. His gray hide bore new silver markings around his massive shoulders, and his steps carried the careful weight of a creature who understood his own importance. Every morning, he would make his rounds with Sierra gliding alongside. The 25-foot python, now sleek and powerful, her golden scales catching the Florida sunlight like living jewelry. Bill Henderson, at 69, had found a peace he'd never expected to discover. The sanctuary thrived beyond his wildest dreams, welcoming thousands of visitors each year who came to witness the impossible friendship that had captured hearts worldwide. Children pressed their faces against the observation fence, watching Thunder gently nudge Sierra toward the shade when the afternoon heat grew too intense, or Sierra coiling protectively around Thunder's legs when storms rolled in from the Gulf. Sarah had married Dr. Rebecca Stone in a ceremony held beneath the oak tree, with Thunder and Sierra serving as unofficial witnesses. Their 18-month-old daughter, Mary Elizabeth, named for her grandmother and born on the anniversary of Thunder and Sierra's first meeting, took her first steps in the sanctuary while her unusual guardians watched with what could only be described as pride. "Sometimes I watch that baby with those two," Bill would tell visitors, rocking on his porch as the sun set over the Everglades. "And I think maybe the good Lord knew what he was doing all along. Maybe Tommy's still here somehow, watching over us through the biggest heart he ever put in a bull." The sanctuary had grown into something magical, a place where broken things found healing and impossible things became everyday miracles. Thunder's story was taught in schools across the country, his example of forgiveness and protection inspiring children to see beyond differences and find the courage to love without conditions. As evening fell over Cypress Creek, Thunder and Sierra took their familiar positions beneath the oak tree, a bull and a python, a protector and his charge. Two souls who had found in each other something the world said shouldn't exist but couldn't deny. Love that transcends understanding, forgiveness that heals all wounds, and faith that miracles still walk among us in the most unexpected forms. The morning of September 15th started like any other at Cypress Creek Wildlife Sanctuary, with Thunder making his careful patrol of the fence line while Sierra glided through the tall grass nearby. But something felt different in the air, a tension that made the old Brahman's nostrils flare and his massive head lift toward the cypress swamp beyond their protected haven. Bill Henderson noticed it too as he stepped onto his porch with his morning coffee. After 70 years in Florida, a man learned to read the signs that nature provided. The birds were quiet, too quiet for this time of morning. The usual chorus of frogs and insects had fallen silent, replaced by an unnatural stillness that made his Vietnam-trained instincts prickle with unease. "Sarah," he called toward the house, his voice carrying the edge of concern that his daughter had learned to recognize. "Something's stirring out there." Sarah emerged from the kitchen, little Mary perched on her hip, both of them drawn by the unusual quiet that had settled over their normally vibrant sanctuary. Even Thunder seemed affected, his massive frame tense as he positioned himself between the approaching tree line and the area where Sierra rested in her favorite patch of morning sunlight. The disturbance began as a rustling in the distant undergrowth, barely audible but growing steadily louder. Thunder's ears swiveled toward the sound, his dark eyes fixed on a point beyond the sanctuary fence where something large was moving through the dense vegetation. Sierra lifted her magnificent head, tasting the air with her forked tongue, reading chemical signals that spoke of danger approaching from the wild heart of the Everglades. What emerged from the cypress swamp would test everything Thunder had learned about protection, loyalty, and the delicate balance he'd worked so hard to maintain. A massive wild boar, easily 400 pounds of muscle and fury, burst through the undergrowth with the desperate energy of an animal running from something even more dangerous. Behind the boar came the reason for its panic, a Florida black bear, nearly 6 feet tall when standing, pursuing its potential meal with the single-minded determination of a predator sensing weakness. The chase crashed through the sanctuary's outer fence like it was made of paper, sending wooden posts splintering and wire mesh curling back on itself. The boar, bleeding from claw marks across its shoulders, stumbled into the open pasture where Thunder and Sierra maintained their peaceful domain. The bear followed seconds later, its massive paws thundering across the ground as it closed the distance to its prey. Thunder faced an impossible choice in that split second that seemed to stretch into eternity. Every instinct told him to protect his territory, to drive out these intruders who threatened the safety he'd worked so hard to create. But another instinct, deeper and more powerful, recognized the terror in the boar's small eyes, the desperation of a creature fighting for its life against impossible odds. Sierra moved first, her powerful coils propelling her toward the confrontation with fluid grace. But instead of fleeing or hiding as any sensible python might do, she positioned herself between the bear and the wounded boar, her massive body coiled in a defensive posture that spoke of protection rather than aggression. Her golden eyes met Thunder's across the pasture, and in that moment, some unspoken understanding passed between them. Thunder charged, not toward the boar or away from the bear, but directly into the path of the pursuing predator, his 2,000 pounds of muscle and determination making the earth shake with each thunderous step. The bear, startled by this unexpected intervention, reared up on its hind legs and roared a challenge that echoed across the sanctuary like a primal scream from the dawn of time. But Thunder didn't stop. He planted himself between the bear and its intended prey, his massive head lowered and his horns gleaming in the morning sunlight. Behind him, Sierra had coiled protectively around the wounded boar, her body creating a living shield, while the terrified animal trembled against her scales. The standoff lasted for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The bear, confused by this unprecedented alliance between natural enemies, circled the strange tableau, while Thunder matched its every movement. The massive bull's eyes never left the bear's face, reading the predator's intentions with the skill of a creature who had spent his life protecting others. Finally, faced with the united front of Thunder's determination and Sierra's protective coils, the bear seemed to reach some internal calculation about risk versus reward. With a final frustrated roar, it turned and lumbered back toward the cypress swamp, leaving behind the wounded boar and the 2 guardians who had dared to challenge the natural order. As the immediate danger passed, Thunder approached the injured boar with the same gentle care he'd once shown to Sierra. The wild pig, still trembling from its ordeal, allowed the massive bull to examine its wounds while Sierra maintained her protective position nearby. Once again, Thunder had chosen compassion over convention, protection over self-preservation. The wounded boar's arrival marked a turning point that nobody at Cypress Creek could have anticipated. What had begun as a simple rescue had evolved into something far more complex and beautiful than anyone dared imagine. Thunder, with his infinite capacity for compassion, had once again opened his heart to a creature in need, but this time the implications would ripple far beyond the sanctuary's borders. Dr. Rebecca Stone arrived within the hour, her veterinary bag in hand and wonder in her eyes as she surveyed the unlikely trio gathered beneath the oak tree. The boar, which they'd begun calling Brutus due to his impressive size and battle scars, had settled into an uneasy truce with his rescuers. Sierra maintained a respectful distance, while Thunder stood guard, his massive presence a calming influence on the frightened wild pig. "I've seen a lot of impossible things since Thunder and Sierra came together," Rebecca told the assembled crowd of sanctuary staff and curious neighbors. "But this defies every principle of animal behavior I've ever studied. A bull, a python, and a wild boar forming a protective alliance, it should be impossible." Bill Henderson watched from his porch as his daughter Sarah documented the historic moment with her camera, little Mary babbling excitedly from her grandmother's arms. The old rancher had lived through enough impossible things in his 70 years to know that sometimes the heart sees truths that the mind can't comprehend. Thunder had taught him that lesson 2 years ago, and now the great bull was teaching it to the world once again. But Thunder's decision to protect Brutus wasn't without consequences. Word of the sanctuary's new resident spread quickly through the local community, and not everyone was pleased with the development. Wild boars were destructive creatures, known for rooting up crops and threatening livestock. Many of the neighboring ranchers viewed Thunder's compassion as misguided at best, dangerous at worst. "That bull's lost his mind," grumbled Jake Patterson, whose cattle ranch bordered the sanctuary to the north. "Wild boars carry disease, destroy property, and attack anything that gets in their way. Henderson needs to put that pig down before it causes real trouble." The criticism stung, but Bill had learned to trust Thunder's judgment above the opinions of men who measured worth in dollars and cents. The great bull had never been wrong about character, never chosen unwisely when it came to extending protection to those in need. If Thunder believed Brutus deserved a chance at redemption, then Bill was willing to stand behind that decision. Thunder seemed to understand the controversy his choice had created. Over the following days, he worked tirelessly to integrate Brutus into the sanctuary's peaceful routine, teaching the wild boar the boundaries and expectations that came with sanctuary life. When Brutus showed aggression toward the fence line where visitors gathered, Thunder would gently but firmly guide him away. When the boar's natural rooting instincts threatened Sarah's vegetable garden, Thunder positioned himself as a living barrier until Brutus learned to respect the cultivated areas. Most remarkably, Thunder taught Brutus to interact peacefully with Sierra. The python, with her predatory nature and formidable size, represented everything that should have terrified a wild pig. But under Thunder's patient guidance, Brutus learned to tolerate and eventually even seek comfort from Sierra's presence. The three animals developed their own complex language of positioning and movement, a ballet of mutual respect that left observers speechless. The breakthrough came during a thunderstorm that rolled in from the Gulf with the fury of nature unleashed. Lightning split the sky and thunder shook the earth while rain fell in sheets that turned the sanctuary into a temporary lake. Most animals would have sought individual shelter, but Thunder led his unlikely family to the oak tree where their friendship had begun. Sierra coiled herself around the base of the tree, her body creating a living wall against the driving rain. Thunder positioned himself to break the wind, his massive frame sheltering both his companions from the storm's fury. And Brutus, the wild creature who had never known protection or kindness, pressed himself against Thunder's warm flank and found peace in the midst of nature's chaos. Bill watched from his kitchen window as the three animals weathered the storm together and felt tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. His boy Tommy would have understood this moment, would have seen in it the same truth that Thunder embodied every day, that love was not limited by species or circumstance, that family was not defined by blood but by choice, and that sometimes the greatest strength was found in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The storm passed, but its impact on the sanctuary was profound. News outlets picked up the story of Thunder's expanding family, and visitors came from across the country to witness the impossible friendships that had taken root beneath the Florida sun. Children pressed against the observation fence, watching in wonder as Thunder, Sierra, and Brutus moved through their daily routines with the coordination of a family that had been together for generations rather than mere weeks. Academic researchers arrived to study what they termed unprecedented interspecies cooperation, but their clinical terminology seemed inadequate to describe what was happening at Cypress Creek. Dr. Margaret Foster from the University of Florida spent 3 months documenting the animals' interactions, ultimately concluding that Thunder's influence had created a new model for understanding animal cognition and emotional intelligence. What we're seeing here challenges fundamental assumptions about animal consciousness, Dr. Foster explained to a gathering of international wildlife experts. Thunder demonstrates not just intelligence but wisdom, not just protective instincts, but moral reasoning. He's making ethical choices that prioritize the welfare of others over his own comfort and safety. But Thunder himself seemed unaware of his growing fame and scientific significance. Each morning, he continued his patient work of teaching and protecting, showing Brutus how to navigate the sanctuary's routines while maintaining his gentle vigilance over Sierra's well-being. The great bull had found his purpose in service to others, and that purpose filled his days with meaning that transcended academic study or public acclaim. The real test of Thunder's expanding family came when state wildlife officials arrived for an unannounced inspection, prompted by complaints from neighboring ranchers about the sanctuary's wild boar population. Agent Patricia Williams, who had arrested Jake Morrison 2 years earlier, returned to evaluate whether Brutus posed a genuine threat to public safety. Thunder seemed to sense the importance of the moment as Agent Williams and her team approached the observation area. With deliberate precision, he demonstrated Brutus's training, showing how the once wild boar responded to gentle guidance and respected the sanctuary's boundaries. Sierra participated in the demonstration, positioning herself near Brutus to show that even a natural predator could coexist peacefully with the reformed wild pig. The inspection concluded with Agent Williams shaking her head in amazement. "I've never seen anything like it," she admitted to Bill as they stood watching Thunder lead his unusual family through their evening routine. "That bull has accomplished something that wildlife management experts thought impossible. He's domesticated a wild boar through nothing but patience and compassion." As the sun set over Cypress Creek Sanctuary, Thunder settled beneath the oak tree with Sierra coiled at his side and Brutus resting against his flank. The great bull's dark eyes reflected the last light of day as he surveyed his domain, content in the knowledge that another lost soul had found its way home. The sanctuary had found its rhythm with Thunder's expanding family, but the tranquil days were about to be shattered by an arrival that would test every lesson the great bull had learned about forgiveness and protection. It began with a phone call on a humid Tuesday morning that made Bill Henderson's coffee grow cold in his weathered hands. "Mr. Henderson," came the crisp voice of Agent Patricia Williams from the other end of the line. "We've got a situation developing that's going to require Thunder's special talents. There's been an incident at the Gatorland facility north of you, and we've got 3 animals that need immediate sanctuary placement." Bill listened with growing concern as Agent Williams explained the details. A private exotic animal facility had been shut down following an investigation into animal abuse and illegal trafficking. Among the rescued animals were creatures so traumatized by their treatment that conventional rehabilitation centers couldn't handle them. The state was requesting that Cypress Creek accept 3 of the most challenging cases, animals whose psychological damage made them dangerous to both humans and other creatures. "What kind of animals are we talking about?" Bill asked, though something in his gut already knew the answer would complicate their peaceful existence. "A 7-foot alligator named Goliath, who's been kept in a concrete pen too small for proper movement, a Florida panther called Shadow, who was declawed and defanged for illegal photo operations, and a great horned owl named Talon, who was used in underground fighting rings until his wing was permanently damaged. Agent Williams paused. These animals have been broken by human cruelty, Mr. Henderson. They don't trust anything or anyone. We're hoping Thunder might work his magic one more time. Sarah overheard the conversation from the kitchen doorway. Little Mary balanced on her hip and felt her stomach clench with worry. Each animal Thunder had welcomed to their sanctuary had been wounded, but essentially gentle. These new arrivals sounded like creatures whose trauma had turned them into something far more dangerous than anything Thunder had faced before. Dr. Rebecca Stone arrived an hour before the transport trucks, her face grave as she reviewed the medical files Agent Williams had provided. Goliath's concrete imprisonment had caused severe muscle atrophy and psychological damage that manifested as aggressive territorial behavior. Shadow, the panther, had been mutilated to make him safe for photo sessions with tourists, leaving him physically crippled and mentally shattered. Talon's wing injuries meant he could never fly again, and his treatment in fighting rings had made him violently defensive against any perceived threat. "I'm not sure about this, Bill," Rebecca said quietly, watching Thunder make his morning rounds with Sierra and Brutus following in their established pattern. "These aren't animals seeking rescue. These are animals that have been taught to hate and fear everything around them. Thunder's compassion might not be enough to reach them." But Thunder seemed to sense what was coming before the transport vehicles even appeared on the horizon. The great bull positioned himself near the sanctuary's main gate, his massive frame alert and ready, while Sierra coiled nearby, and Brutus snorted nervously at the unfamiliar tension in the air. When the convoy of federal trucks arrived, Thunder watched with those dark, intelligent eyes as 3 heavily secured transport cages were carefully unloaded onto sanctuary grounds. The first cage held Goliath, 7 feet of scarred prehistoric fury, whose yellow eyes burned with rage and suspicion. The alligator's body showed the deformities of inadequate confinement, his once magnificent form twisted by years of abuse. When the cage door opened, Goliath erupted onto sanctuary grounds with a violence that sent federal agents scrambling for safety. His powerful tail lashed out at anything within range while his jaws snapped at shadows and memories of tormentors who were no longer there. Thunder's response was immediate and surprising. Instead of backing away from the furious reptile, the great bull approached slowly, his movements deliberately non-threatening. When Goliath spun toward him with jaws agape, Thunder simply stopped and waited, allowing the alligator to process his presence without pressure or demand. For 20 minutes, bull and alligator studied each other while everyone else held their breath. Shadow emerged from his transport cage like a broken ghost of what a panther should be. Without claws or fangs, the great cat moved with the careful gait of a creature who had learned that every step might bring pain. His golden eyes, once proud and wild, now held only emptiness and the kind of wariness that comes from too much betrayal. When Thunder approached, Shadow crouched low and hissed through his damaged mouth, but there was no real threat in the sound, only the desperate posturing of something that had forgotten how to trust. Talon presented perhaps the greatest challenge. The great horned owl's damaged wing hung at an unnatural angle, and his fierce amber eyes tracked every movement with predatory intensity. When his cage opened, Talon launched himself at the nearest human with talons extended, his attack cry echoing across the sanctuary like a war cry from another world. Only Thunder's intervention, positioning himself between the owl and the federal agents, prevented serious injury. What happened next would be remembered as one of Thunder's greatest demonstrations of wisdom and patience. The massive bull didn't try to force interaction with any of the 3 traumatized animals. Instead, he simply made himself available, positioning his bulk where they could see him while maintaining enough distance to avoid triggering their defensive responses. Sierra and Brutus followed his lead, creating a semicircle of calm presence around the damaged creatures. Days passed with minimal progress. Goliath remained coiled in aggressive readiness near the main pond, striking out at anything that moved within his considerable reach. Shadow prowled the perimeter of the sanctuary with restless energy, his mutilated paws making soft sounds on the grass as he searched for threats that existed only in his traumatized mind. Talon perched on the lowest branch of the oak tree, his broken wing preventing him from reaching the heights where he might feel secure. Thunder's breakthrough came during feeding time on the fourth day. Instead of eating his own hay and grain, the great bull carefully carried portions of his meal to each of the newcomers, dropping the food just outside their comfort zones before retreating to a respectful distance. The gesture spoke of understanding that went beyond species, a recognition that hunger was a universal language of need. Goliath was the first to respond, his reptilian brain eventually overcoming suspicion enough to accept the offered vegetation. The alligator's approach to Thunder's gifts was cautious but determined, his powerful body moving with surprising grace as he sampled the food that had been freely given. When Thunder made no move to reclaim the meal or assert dominance, Goliath's defensive posture began to relax fractionally. Shadow required more time and patience. The crippled panther circled Thunder's offerings for hours before finally approaching, his damaged paws silent on the sanctuary grass. When he discovered that the food was genuinely meant for him, something shifted in his golden eyes. Not trust, not yet, but perhaps the faintest possibility that trust might someday be possible. Talon's acceptance came through Sierra rather than Thunder directly. The python, with her predatory nature and patient hunting instincts, understood something about the owl's psychology that the others couldn't grasp. She began positioning herself beneath Talon's perch in a way that provided both security and companionship, her coils creating a living foundation that made the damaged bird feel less vulnerable. The real test came when a violent thunderstorm struck the sanctuary 2 weeks after the newcomer's arrival. Thunder had always used such storms as opportunities to reinforce the bonds within his unusual family, gathering his charges beneath the oak tree where they could weather nature's fury together. But Goliath, Shadow, and Talon had never experienced protection during vulnerability, had never learned to trust others when they couldn't protect themselves. As lightning split the sky and rain began to fall in torrents, Thunder made a decision that demonstrated the full depth of his wisdom. Instead of trying to gather all the animals in one place, he divided his attention among them, moving constantly through the storm to provide comfort where it was needed most. He positioned himself near Goliath when the alligator's trauma made him thrash violently at each thunder crack. He stood over Shadow when the panther's fear drove him to seek shelter beneath the great bull's protective bulk. He remained within sight of Talon when the owl's inability to fly made him desperate with panic. Sierra and Brutus, understanding their roles in Thunder's expanded mission, took up supporting positions throughout the sanctuary. Sierra coiled herself near the base of Talon's tree, her presence a calming constant in the chaos of the storm. Brutus, despite his own fear of the thunder and lightning, positioned himself where Goliath could see his solid, reassuring form through the driving rain. The storm lasted 6 hours, and when it finally passed, something fundamental had changed in the sanctuary's dynamics. Goliath, exhausted from his fear and Thunder's patient presence, allowed the great bull to approach within touching distance for the first time. Shadow, who had sheltered beneath Thunder's protective bulk, remained close even after the immediate danger had passed. Talon, secure in his tree with Sierra coiled beneath and Thunder standing guard nearby, began to groom his damaged feathers with something approaching contentment. Dr. Rebecca Stone documented the transformation with wonder and professional curiosity. What Thunder accomplished during that storm, she explained to the gathered researchers and federal officials, was to demonstrate that protection could exist without domination, that safety could be offered without demanding submission in return. These animals have been taught that every interaction with another creature involves either dominance or subjugation. Thunder showed them a third option: cooperation based on mutual benefit and respect. But Thunder's success with the traumatized trio came at a personal cost that only those closest to him began to recognize. The great bull's movements had slowed slightly, his massive frame showing the first signs of the wear that comes from carrying the emotional weight of so many damaged souls. Bill Henderson noticed it first, the way Thunder's steps were more deliberate in the mornings, the way his dark eyes sometimes held a weariness that spoke of burdens beyond the physical. "He's taking on their pain," Sarah observed one evening as they watched Thunder settle beneath the oak tree surrounded by his unlikely family. "Every animal he helps, every soul he saves, he carries a piece of their trauma with him." It was true. Thunder's capacity for empathy, the very quality that made him such a remarkable healer, was also slowly draining the great bull's own reserves. Each successful rescue added to his sense of purpose, but also to the weight of responsibility he carried. The sanctuary had become more than a home. It had become Thunder's calling, his mission, and perhaps his burden. Yet despite the growing weariness, Thunder continued his work with unwavering dedication. Each morning brought new challenges as Goliath, Shadow, and Talon gradually learned to trust not just Thunder, but each other. The alligator's aggressive territorial behavior softened into protective vigilance. The panther's restless prowling evolved into purposeful patrols that complemented Thunder's own security rounds. The owl's defensive hostility transformed into watchful guardianship from his perch high above the sanctuary. As autumn painted the Florida landscape in shades of gold and red, Thunder's expanded family had found their place in the sanctuary's complex ecosystem. But their healing had cost the great bull something precious, and those who loved him most began to realize that Thunder's greatest triumph might also be preparing the way for his greatest sacrifice. The sanctuary had become a place where the broken found wholeness, where the damaged discovered dignity, and where the lost learned to trust again. But at its heart stood a bull whose own heart was growing heavy with the weight of too much love, too much compassion, and too much understanding of a world that often seemed determined to break what was beautiful. Thunder's story was far from over, but those who knew him best began to sense that it was approaching a crescendo that would test not just his strength and wisdom, but his very willingness to continue bearing the sorrows of a world that needed his light. The sanctuary had grown beyond anything Bill Henderson could have imagined when Thunder first arrived 8 years ago, but with success came challenges that tested every principle the great bull had established. The morning that would change everything began with an urgent phone call from Agent Patricia Williams, her voice carrying a tension that made Bill's weathered hands tighten around his coffee cup. "We've got a situation that's beyond anything we've dealt with before," Agent Williams said without preamble. "There's been a massive raid on an illegal fighting operation in the Everglades. We've recovered 37 animals, and most of them are in such bad shape that conventional facilities can't handle them. We need Thunder's help, but Bill, I'm not sure even he can handle what we're asking." The transport convoy that arrived at Cypress Creek 3 hours later stretched nearly a quarter-mile along the sanctuary's main road. Federal agents, veterinarians, and wildlife specialists moved with grim efficiency as they unloaded cage after cage of damaged creatures. Bears with scarred faces and broken spirits, wolves whose pack bonds had been shattered by years of forced fighting, even a massive Florida black panther, whose eyes held the kind of emptiness that comes from witnessing too much cruelty. Dr. Rebecca Stone emerged from the lead vehicle looking like she'd aged 10 years in the past week. "Bill, these animals have been through hell," she said quietly, gesturing toward the assembled cages. "We're talking about creatures that have been systematically brutalized, forced to fight each other for human entertainment. Some of them may never recover from what they've experienced." Thunder seemed to sense the magnitude of what was arriving before the first cage was even opened. The great bull positioned himself at the center of the sanctuary's main field, his massive frame radiating the calm authority that had become his trademark. Sierra coiled nearby, her golden scales catching the morning sunlight, while Brutus, Goliath, Shadow, and Talon took up supporting positions around their leader. The sanctuary's established family was preparing for their greatest challenge yet. The first animal released was a black bear named Titan, whose face bore scars from countless forced battles. When the cage door opened, Titan emerged with the wary aggression of a creature that had learned to see every encounter as a potential fight. His massive paws, once used for climbing trees and foraging for berries, now bore the calluses and scars of too many violent confrontations. Thunder approached slowly, his movements deliberately non-threatening, allowing Titan to process his presence without feeling cornered or challenged. What followed was a complex dance of psychology and patience that showcased Thunder's most sophisticated understanding of animal behavior. Instead of trying to dominate or pacify Titan, Thunder simply made himself available as a presence of stability in the bear's chaotic world. When Titan charged at a perceived threat that existed only in his traumatized mind, Thunder positioned himself between the bear and the imagined danger, absorbing the aggressive energy without responding in kind. The wolves presented an even greater challenge. The pack bonds that should have made them cooperative had been perverted by their captors into instruments of survival and betrayal. Luna, the alpha female, had been forced to fight her own pack members for food and territory. Storm, a massive gray male, bore emotional scars from being separated from his mate during the fighting operations. Echo, the youngest, had never known life outside the fighting rings and approached every interaction with the defensive hostility of a creature that expected pain. Thunder's approach to the wolves demonstrated the full evolution of his healing methods. Rather than trying to establish dominance over the damaged pack, he worked to restore their natural social bonds by providing a neutral space where they could rediscover their relationships without the pressure of survival. He positioned himself as a living barrier between pack members when their trauma triggered aggressive responses, allowing them to gradually remember that cooperation could exist without exploitation. The most heartbreaking case was a Florida panther named Ghost, whose silver-gray coat had earned him his name, but whose spirit had been nearly extinguished by years of abuse. Ghost had been the prize fighter in the illegal operation, forced to battle everything from bears to alligators for the entertainment of criminal spectators. His body bore the scars of countless victories that had cost him pieces of his soul with each triumph. Thunder's first encounter with Ghost nearly ended in disaster. The panther, seeing Thunder's massive size and calm demeanor, interpreted the bull's presence as a challenge that demanded response. Ghost launched himself at Thunder with the fluid violence of a professional killer, his claws extended, and his powerful jaws seeking the kind of hold that had ended so many fights in his favor. But Thunder's response defied every expectation Ghost had developed about combat. Instead of fighting back or fleeing, the great bull simply absorbed the attack, his massive frame providing a stable foundation that Ghost's violence couldn't shake. Thunder's skin, toughened by years of protecting others, could withstand the panther's claws without serious damage, and his calm patience gradually drained the aggression from Ghost's assault. For 3 hours, Ghost attacked Thunder with decreasing intensity, each failed attempt to provoke a violent response chipping away at the panther's conditioned expectations. When Ghost finally collapsed from exhaustion, Thunder gently positioned himself nearby, close enough to provide warmth and security, but far enough away to avoid triggering another defensive response. Dr. Rebecca Stone documented the encounter with tears streaming down her face. What Thunder just demonstrated, she explained to the assembled researchers, was the complete rejection of violence as a solution to conflict. He absorbed Ghost's trauma-driven aggression and transformed it into an opportunity for healing. That's not just remarkable animal behavior, that's a level of emotional intelligence that most humans never achieve. But Thunder's success with the fighting animals came at a cost that became more apparent with each passing day. The great bull's movements had slowed noticeably, his massive frame showing signs of the physical and emotional toll of absorbing so much pain and trauma. Bill Henderson noticed that Thunder's eyes, once bright with the joy of helping others, now carried a weariness that spoke of burdens almost too heavy to bear. The breaking point came when the sanctuary received its most challenging case yet, a young bull named Rage, who had been raised from birth to fight. Unlike the other animals who had been damaged by their experiences, Rage knew nothing but violence and competition. He had never experienced kindness, never known protection, never learned that interactions could exist without winners and losers. Rage's arrival at the sanctuary created immediate chaos. The young bull, nearly Thunder's size but lacking any of his wisdom, charged everything he perceived as a threat or challenge. His attacks on the sanctuary's fencing sent federal agents scrambling for safety, and his aggressive bellowing disturbed animals across the facility. When Thunder approached to establish communication, Rage interpreted the gesture as a challenge to his dominance. The fight that followed was unlike anything anyone at Cypress Creek had ever witnessed. Rage attacked Thunder with the focused violence of a creature bred for combat, his horns seeking the vulnerable spots that had been trained into him through years of forced battles. Thunder, despite his size advantage and greater experience, found himself truly challenged for the first time since arriving at the sanctuary. But even in the heat of battle, Thunder's fundamental nature asserted itself. Instead of using his superior strength to dominate Rage, Thunder fought defensively, absorbing punishment while looking for opportunities to demonstrate that strength could exist without cruelty. Each time Rage expected a devastating counterattack, Thunder instead offered patience and understanding. The battle lasted nearly an hour, with Thunder growing visibly weaker as he absorbed Rage's relentless assault. Blood seeped from cuts on Thunder's flanks where Rage's horns had found their mark, and the great bull's breathing became labored as exhaustion began to take its toll. But Thunder never responded with the kind of violence that Rage expected, never validated the young bull's belief that every encounter must end with one victor and one victim. The turning point came when Thunder, battered and bleeding, simply stopped fighting back entirely. Instead of continuing the battle or retreating to safety, Thunder lay down in the grass and waited. The gesture spoke louder than any dominance display could have, communicating a truth that Rage had never encountered, that strength could choose not to be used, that power could exist in service rather than domination. Rage stood over Thunder's prone form, confusion replacing aggression in his dark eyes. Everything in his training told him to press his advantage, to finish what had been started. But Thunder's complete vulnerability, his willingness to trust even an enemy with his life, created a cognitive dissonance that shattered Rage's programmed responses. For the first time in his young life, Rage experienced a choice that wasn't about survival or dominance. Thunder's trust offered him the opportunity to be something other than a weapon, to discover what he might become if violence wasn't his only option. The young bull stood frozen for long minutes, his entire worldview restructuring around this unprecedented demonstration of faith. When Rage finally stepped back without delivering a killing blow, something fundamental had changed in both animals. Thunder had proven that love could triumph over violence not through superior force, but through the courage to remain vulnerable in the face of aggression. Rage had discovered that he possessed the capacity for mercy, that his strength could protect rather than destroy. Dr. Rebecca Stone rushed to examine Thunder's injuries while the entire sanctuary held its breath. The great bull's wounds were serious, but not life-threatening, testament to his skill at absorbing punishment while protecting vital areas. But more concerning to those who knew him best was the deep exhaustion in Thunder's eyes, the sense that this latest triumph had cost him something precious and irreplaceable. "He's giving too much of himself," Sarah whispered to her father as they watched Dr. Stone work. "Each animal he saves takes something from him." "I'm scared that one day there won't be enough left." Bill Henderson nodded grimly, his own eyes reflecting the concern that had been growing in his heart for months. Thunder's capacity for healing others seemed limitless, but the great bull himself was not invincible. Each success added to his legend, but also to the weight of responsibility he carried, the burden of being hope incarnate for creatures that had forgotten how to trust. As night fell over Cypress Creek Sanctuary, Thunder rested beneath the ancient oak tree surrounded by his ever-growing family of rescued souls. Rage lay nearby, still processing the revolution in understanding that Thunder had sparked within him. The other animals, Sierra, Brutus, Goliath, Shadow, Talon, Titan, Luna, Storm, Echo, and Ghost, arranged themselves in a protective circle around their leader, their diverse forms creating a living mandala of redemption and hope. But at the center of this miraculous gathering, Thunder closed his eyes with the weariness of Atlas, carrying the world's pain upon his shoulders. The great bull had proven once again that love was stronger than violence, that patience could triumph over aggression, and that trust could transform even the most damaged spirits. Yet those who loved him most began to fear that Thunder's greatest gift, his infinite capacity for compassion, might also become his greatest vulnerability in a world that seemed determined to test just how much one heart could hold. The sanctuary had become a beacon of hope for the broken and the lost, but its guardian was showing signs of wear that no amount of medical care could address. Thunder's spirit remained willing, but his body and soul were bearing the accumulated weight of too many rescues, too many transformations, too many miracles wrought through the sheer force of his loving will. The morning that would shatter everything began with Thunder struggling to rise from his resting place beneath the oak tree. Bill Henderson noticed it first from his kitchen window, the way the great bull's movements lacked their usual fluid grace, how his massive frame seemed to tremble with effort that had never been required before. For 8 years, Thunder had been the sanctuary's unwavering constant, but now, something fundamental was changing in ways that made the old rancher's heart clench with dread. Dr. Rebecca Stone arrived within an hour of Bill's urgent phone call, her veterinary bag clutched tightly as she approached Thunder with the careful movements of someone who understood they were witnessing the beginning of something heartbreaking. The examination confirmed what everyone feared but no one wanted to acknowledge. Thunder's heart was failing. Years of carrying the emotional and physical weight of damaged souls had taken a toll that even his magnificent constitution couldn't withstand indefinitely. "His heart is enlarged," Rebecca explained to the assembled family, her professional composure cracking as she struggled to deliver the devastating news. "The constant stress of protecting and healing others has weakened the very organ that made him capable of such extraordinary love. We're looking at congestive heart failure, and at his age and size, treatment options are extremely limited." Sarah collapsed into her father's arms while little Mary, now 3 years old, seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, despite not understanding the words. Thunder watched the human drama unfolding around him with those dark, intelligent eyes that had witnessed so much healing and hope. Even in his weakness, the great bull's primary concern seemed to be for the distress his condition was causing those who loved him. The news of Thunder's illness spread through the sanctuary like wildfire, affecting every animal in ways that defied scientific explanation. Sierra, who had never left Thunder's side for more than a few hours in over 3 years, coiled herself closer to the bull's massive frame and refused to move. Brutus paced restlessly around their resting place, his snorts and grunts carrying an urgency that spoke of understanding beyond animal instinct. Even the newer arrivals, Rage, Ghost, Titan, and the damaged wolves, seemed to sense that their savior was in mortal danger. Thunder's decline accelerated with heartbreaking swiftness. Within days, the bull who had once moved with the authority of a mountain found himself struggling to complete his morning patrols of the sanctuary grounds. His breathing became labored, his appetite diminished, and the light in his eyes began to dim with the approaching shadow of mortality. Yet even as his body failed him, Thunder's spirit remained focused on his charges, his protective instincts overriding his own need for rest and care. The most devastating moment came when Thunder attempted to intervene in a minor squabble between two of the rescued wolves and collapsed from the effort. The great bull's legs simply gave out beneath him, his massive frame hitting the ground with a sound that echoed across the sanctuary like thunder itself. For a terrifying moment, everyone thought they had lost him, but Thunder's eyes remained open, still alert and aware even as his body betrayed the strength that had defined him. Dr. Rebecca Stone worked frantically to stabilize Thunder's condition, administering medications that might ease his suffering but couldn't address the fundamental damage to his heart. "We can make him more comfortable," she explained through tears, "but we can't fix what's broken. His heart has simply given too much for too long." Bill Henderson spent hours sitting beside Thunder's resting place, his weathered hand stroking the bull's massive head, while memories of their 8 years together played through his mind, like scenes from a beautiful dream that was ending too soon. He remembered the day Thunder arrived, how the young bull had seemed to understand that he was joining a family rather than just a herd. He recalled countless moments of quiet companionship, of watching Thunder's wisdom grow and deepen as he learned to heal not just bodies, but souls. "You've done enough, old friend," Bill whispered into Thunder's ear during one of their quiet vigils. "You've saved more lives than any creature has a right to save. It's okay to rest now. It's okay to let go." But Thunder wasn't ready to surrender, not while his family still needed him. Despite his failing health, the great bull continued to position himself where he could watch over the other animals, his presence a calming influence, even when he lacked the strength to actively intervene. Sierra remained coiled against his side, her body providing warmth and comfort, while her eyes maintained a vigilant watch for any threats to their weakened leader. The sanctuary's routine adapted around Thunder's limitations, with Rage stepping forward to assume some of the protective duties that had once been Thunder's alone. The younger bull's transformation from violent aggressor to gentle guardian represented perhaps Thunder's greatest triumph, proof that love could indeed conquer the deepest programming and the most damaged spirit. Watching Rage patrol the sanctuary with Thunder's characteristic patience and wisdom brought tears to the eyes of everyone who understood the magnitude of what had been accomplished. Ghost, the Silver Panther who had once known only violence, appointed himself as Thunder's personal guardian, positioning his sleek form where he could intercept any potential threats to the failing bull. The sight of the former fighter protecting his protector created a tableau of loyalty and love that spoke to the deepest truths about the bonds that can form between wounded souls, finding healing together. As Thunder's condition deteriorated, the sanctuary became a place of pilgrimage for people who had heard about the great bull's incredible legacy of healing and hope. Families drove from across the country to witness the living proof that love could triumph over hatred, that patience could overcome violence, and that one creature's compassion could transform an entire community of broken spirits. Children pressed their faces against the observation fence, their innocent eyes wide with wonder at the sight of so many different animals united in their concern for their ailing leader. The veterinary team established a round-the-clock watch, monitoring Thunder's vital signs while doing everything possible to ease his suffering. But everyone understood that they were fighting a losing battle against a heart that had simply loved too much for too long. Thunder's breathing became increasingly labored, his periods of rest growing longer as his massive body struggled to function with an organ that could no longer support his enormous frame. 3 weeks after the initial diagnosis, Thunder experienced a crisis that brought the entire sanctuary to a standstill. His breathing became so labored that Dr. Rebecca Stone feared each breath might be his last, while his eyes took on the distant look of a creature preparing to journey beyond the reach of earthly love and responsibility. The other animals seemed to sense that their leader was slipping away, gathering around his resting place in a silent vigil that spoke of understanding beyond the boundaries of species. Bill Henderson made the most difficult decision of his life, authorizing Dr. Stone to prepare for the possibility that Thunder's suffering might need to be ended humanely if his condition became unbearable. The thought of losing Thunder was devastating enough, but the idea of making the choice to let him go felt like a betrayal of everything the great bull had represented. Yet Bill's love for Thunder demanded that he be willing to spare his friend unnecessary pain, even if it meant enduring the agony of saying goodbye. Sarah held her father as they sat beside Thunder's still form, both of them remembering the countless ways the great bull had enriched their lives and the lives of everyone who had encountered his extraordinary spirit. Little Mary, too young to fully understand death but old enough to sense loss, placed her tiny hand on Thunder's massive head and whispered words of love in the pure, innocent voice of childhood. As the sun began to set over Cypress Creek Sanctuary, Thunder opened his eyes one final time and looked around at the family he had created through 8 years of unwavering love and protection. Sierra coiled against his side. Brutus stood guard nearby, while Rage, Ghost, and all the others maintained their protective circle around their failing leader. The sight of so many former enemies united in love and loyalty represented the living embodiment of Thunder's legacy, proof that his life had created something beautiful and lasting that would endure long after his massive heart finally stopped beating. In that moment, surrounded by the creatures he had saved and the humans who had loved him, Thunder seemed to find a peace that transcended his physical suffering. His breathing steadied slightly, his eyes focused with something approaching contentment, and for a brief, precious moment, the great bull appeared to be exactly what he had always been. The gentle giant whose infinite capacity for love had transformed an entire world of broken spirits into a family bound by hope, healing, and the kind of devotion that makes life worth living. The truth that would change everything came not from medical equipment or veterinary expertise, but from the gentle persistence of a 3-year-old child who saw what adults had missed. Little Mary Henderson had been Thunder's constant companion during his illness, her small hands offering comfort to the great bull, while her innocent observations often revealed insights that escaped more experienced minds. On the morning that would transform tragedy into triumph, Mary made a discovery that shattered every assumption about Thunder's condition. "Grandpa," Mary said quietly, tugging at Bill's weathered sleeve as they sat beside Thunder's resting place. "Thunder's not dying. He's saving his strength for something big." Bill looked down at his granddaughter with the patient expression adults reserve for children's fantasies, but something in Mary's serious tone made him pause. The little girl had spent more time with Thunder than anyone else during his illness, often falling asleep curled against his massive flank, while the great bull's gentle breathing provided a rhythm of comfort and security. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Bill asked, kneeling beside Mary so their eyes were level. Mary pointed toward the sanctuary's perimeter, where the morning mist still clung to the cypress trees. "Thunder keeps looking that way. He's waiting for someone important to come home." Before Bill could respond, the sound of approaching vehicles echoed across the sanctuary grounds. But these weren't the familiar trucks of federal agents or veterinary teams. The convoy that emerged from the morning mist consisted of military vehicles, their olive-drab paint and official markings creating a stark contrast against the peaceful landscape of Cypress Creek. Agent Patricia Williams emerged from the lead vehicle with an expression of barely contained excitement, followed by a figure that made Bill Henderson's weathered heart skip several beats. Staff Sergeant Tommy Henderson, reported killed in action 10 years ago in Afghanistan, walked across the sanctuary grounds with the careful gait of a man who had survived what should have been impossible. "Dad," Tommy said simply, his voice carrying the weight of a decade's worth of explanations and apologies. "I'm sorry it took so long to come home." The revelation that followed would rewrite everything the Henderson family thought they knew about loss, hope, and the mysterious connections that bind hearts across impossible distances. Tommy's death had been a cover story, his actual fate involving a classified rescue mission that had gone wrong, leaving him a prisoner in remote mountains where rescue seemed impossible. For 10 years, he had been listed as missing in action, while intelligence agencies worked to secure his release through diplomatic channels that moved with glacial slowness. Thunder's reaction to Tommy's arrival was immediate and profound. The great bull, who had been barely able to lift his massive head for days, suddenly struggled to his feet with a strength that defied his medical condition. His dark eyes, which had grown dim with approaching death, blazed with recognition and joy as he slowly made his way toward the young man who had been his first and greatest love. "He knew," Dr. Rebecca Stone whispered in amazement, watching Thunder's transformation. Somehow, he knew Tommy was coming home. That's why he held on when every medical indicator said he should have died weeks ago. Tommy approached Thunder with tears streaming down his battle-scarred face, his hands trembling as they reached out to touch the bull who had been more than a pet, more than livestock, more than anything the world had words to describe. Thunder lowered his massive head to accept Tommy's embrace, and in that moment, the sanctuary witnessed a reunion that transcended species, transcended understanding, and transcended everything that science claimed to know about the bonds between human and animal hearts. "I dreamed about you every night," Tommy whispered into Thunder's ear, his voice breaking with emotion. "In the worst moments, when I thought I'd never see home again, I'd remember you and know I had to keep fighting. I had to come back for you." The medical miracle that followed defied every principle of veterinary science Dr. Rebecca Stone had ever learned. Thunder's vital signs, which had been declining steadily for weeks, began to stabilize and then improve with a rapidity that left the entire medical team speechless. His breathing became easier, his appetite returned, and the light that had been fading from his eyes blazed forth with renewed intensity. But the most remarkable change was in Thunder's behavior toward his adopted family at the sanctuary. Instead of the exhausted patience that had marked his final weeks, Thunder began displaying an energy and engagement that suggested not just recovery, but rejuvenation. He resumed his protective patrols of the sanctuary grounds, but now Tommy walked beside him, the soldier and the bull moving with the synchronized rhythm of hearts that had never truly been separated. The truth about Thunder's illness became clear as Dr. Stone conducted follow-up examinations that revealed what should have been impossible. The great bull's heart condition hadn't disappeared, but it had stabilized in ways that medical science couldn't explain. Thunder had been dying not from physical ailment alone, but from a broken heart that had somehow known its other half was still alive somewhere in the world. "It's as if his heart was waiting," Dr. Stone explained to the assembled crowd of researchers, journalists, and sanctuary staff. "Every medical indicator said he should have died weeks ago, but something kept him anchored to life. Now that Tommy's home, Thunder's will to live has become stronger than his physical condition." Tommy's return transformed not just Thunder, but the entire sanctuary. The young soldier's experience with trauma and recovery gave him unique insights into the healing process that the rescued animals were undergoing. His presence provided Thunder with a renewed sense of purpose, as the great bull now had his beloved human to protect and guide through his own journey of healing from 10 years of captivity and suffering. The bond between Tommy and Thunder deepened the sanctuary's mission in ways that touched hearts around the world. Their story became a symbol of hope for military families, for anyone who had lost loved ones, and for everyone who believed in the power of love to transcend even death itself. Visitors came from across the globe to witness the living proof that some connections are too strong for war, distance, or time to break. Sierra, Brutus, and all of Thunder's adopted family seemed to understand that their leader had been restored not just to health, but to wholeness. The python coiled contentedly near both Thunder and Tommy during their evening conversations, while Rage and the other rescued animals displayed a peace and security they had never known before. Thunder's happiness became their happiness. His healing became their healing. As autumn painted the Florida landscape in shades of gold and red, the Cypress Creek Wildlife Sanctuary stood as testament to truths that the world desperately needed to hear. Love was stronger than death, hope was more powerful than despair, and the bonds between hearts could survive anything the world threw against them. Thunder and Tommy's reunion had proven that miracles still walked the earth, dressed in forms both mighty and humble, reminding everyone who witnessed their story that love never truly dies. It only waits, patient and eternal, for the moment when hearts can find their way back to each other. The sanctuary's mission had evolved from healing broken animals to healing broken spirits of every kind, with Thunder and Tommy serving as living proof that no separation is permanent when love provides the bridge home. The golden years that followed Tommy's return brought a peace to Cypress Creek Wildlife Sanctuary that seemed to glow with the warmth of dreams fulfilled and promises kept. Thunder, now 12 years old, moved with the dignified grace of an elder statesman whose greatest battles had been fought and won. His massive frame, though showing the gentle silver of advancing age, still commanded respect from every creature that called the sanctuary home. The transformation in Thunder's health had become the stuff of legend among veterinary professionals worldwide. Dr. Rebecca Stone, now married to Sarah Henderson and a permanent fixture at the sanctuary, continued to document what she termed the most remarkable case of psychosomatic healing in recorded animal medicine. Thunder's heart condition had stabilized completely, his vital signs maintaining the steady rhythm of a creature at peace with himself and his world. Tommy had built a small cabin on the sanctuary grounds, close enough to Thunder's favorite resting spot that the two could see each other through the windows at any hour of the day or night. The young soldier, now 34 and bearing the quiet strength that comes from surviving the impossible, had found his calling in helping other veterans struggling with their own invisible wounds. The sanctuary had become an unofficial healing center for military personnel, where the therapy provided by Thunder and his family of rescued animals worked miracles that traditional medicine couldn't achieve. "There's something about Thunder," explained Marine Corporal Lisa Martinez, whose combat trauma had left her unable to trust or connect with other humans. "He looks at you and sees past all the broken pieces to who you really are underneath. When I'm with him, I remember what it feels like to be whole." Sierra, now approaching 30 feet in length and radiating the serene confidence of a creature perfectly content with her place in the world, had become the sanctuary's ambassador to skeptics who still questioned whether such interspecies bonds could truly exist. Her relationship with Thunder had deepened into something that resembled an old married couple, each anticipating the other's needs with the intuitive understanding that comes from years of shared experience. Brutus, Ghost, Rage, and all the other rescued animals had grown into their roles as therapy animals and ambassadors for their species. The wild boar who had once known only fear and aggression now guided groups of special needs children through the sanctuary, his gentle nature and patient temperament making him an ideal companion for young hearts learning to trust. Ghost, the former fighting panther, had become the sanctuary's guardian during the night hours, his sleek form patrolling the perimeter with the dedication of a professional security officer. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation belonged to Rage, the bull who had been bred for violence and knew nothing but combat when he arrived. Under Thunder's patient guidance, Rage had become a co-leader in the sanctuary's healing mission, working specifically with aggressive animals who needed to learn that strength could exist without violence. The sight of the two bulls walking together through the sanctuary grounds, Thunder's silver-touched hide contrasting with Rage's younger darkness, created a living symbol of redemption and hope. Bill Henderson, now 74, spent his evenings on the porch swing Sarah had installed overlooking Thunder's favorite oak tree. The old rancher's weathered hands, which had worked this land for over 50 years, now moved more slowly as they carved wooden toys for his granddaughter Mary and the steady stream of children who visited the sanctuary. His eyes, though dimmed by age, still sparkled with wonder when he watched Thunder interact with the newest arrivals. "Never gets old," he would tell visitors, gesturing toward Thunder's latest healing project. That bull's been teaching hearts how to mend for 8 years now, and every time I think I've seen it all, he shows me something new about what love can do. The sanctuary had expanded to encompass nearly 2,000 acres, funded by donations from around the world and supported by a network of volunteers who came not just to help with animal care, but to witness the daily miracles that had become routine at Cypress Creek. University researchers studied Thunder's methods, attempting to quantify and understand his healing techniques, but most concluded that what happened at the sanctuary transcended scientific explanation. Mary Henderson, now 7 years old, had grown up considering Thunder and his family as extended relatives rather than animals. Her childhood was filled with adventures alongside Sierra, tea parties with Brutus, and bedtime stories told by her grandfather, while Thunder's gentle breathing provided a soundtrack of security. The little girl possessed an intuitive understanding of animal psychology that amazed professionals, often serving as translator between Thunder's methods and human confusion. "Thunder says Ghost is ready to help the new tiger," Mary announced one morning, delivering the news with the matter-of-fact tone of a child who had never questioned that bulls and panthers could communicate complex therapeutic strategies. Her observations, initially dismissed as childhood fantasy, had proven accurate so many times that the sanctuary staff had learned to take her insights seriously. Tommy's own healing had progressed alongside Thunder's continued recovery, the man and bull supporting each other through the complex process of processing trauma and rebuilding trust in a world that had shown them both the extremes of cruelty and kindness. Tommy's work with veteran therapy programs had gained national recognition, his techniques combining traditional counseling with the healing presence of Thunder and the sanctuary family. The annual Thunder Day celebration, held each September to commemorate the anniversary of Thunder and Sierra's first meeting, had grown into a week-long festival that attracted visitors from every continent. Families came to witness the living proof that love could triumph over hatred, that patience could overcome violence, and that one creature's compassion could transform an entire community of broken spirits into something beautiful and whole. As the sun set over Cypress Creek Wildlife Sanctuary on this particular evening, Thunder settled beneath his beloved oak tree, surrounded by the ever-growing family he had created through years of unwavering love and protection. Sierra coiled against his side, her golden scales warm against his silver-touched hide. Tommy sat nearby, reading from a letter sent by another veteran whose life had been changed by their story. Little Mary dozed against Thunder's massive flank, her small hand resting trustingly on the gentle giant who had defined her understanding of love, protection, and the kind of strength that builds rather than destroys. The sanctuary glowed with the soft light of contentment, a place where the broken found wholeness, where the lost discovered family, and where the impossible became everyday reality through the simple but revolutionary power of unconditional love. Thunder's legacy lived on in every rescued soul, every healed heart, and every person who left Cypress Creek with renewed faith in the possibility of redemption. At 74, Bill Henderson understood what most folks his age had learned the hard way, that life's greatest treasures aren't found in bank accounts or trophy cases, but in the quiet moments when love shows up wearing work clothes and muddy boots. Watching Thunder teach a broken-hearted panther how to trust again, or seeing his granddaughter Mary fall asleep against the gentle giant's warm flank, Bill realized he'd been given something precious that money couldn't buy. Proof that kindness never goes out of style. In a world that seemed determined to convince everyone that people don't matter anymore, Thunder's sanctuary stood as living testimony that one heart, willing to love without conditions, could change everything. The old rancher had learned that happiness wasn't about getting what you wanted, but about discovering that what you needed had been there all along, in the form of family that chose you, purpose that found you, and love that never asked for anything in return except the chance to keep giving. Sometimes the greatest adventures begin when you stop running towards something and start standing still long enough to let goodness find its way home to your heart. What moment in your life taught you that family isn't always about blood, but about who chooses to stay? Have you ever witnessed an act of unexpected kindness that restored your faith in the goodness of people? Please share your stories in the comments below. We'd love to hear about the thunders in your own life who taught you about unconditional love.